かわいいこと。Hey everyone, Dennis Chang here. Welcome to another video. I'm very happy because yesterday we did our last recording of the year for DC Music School, and now I can just relax. It was mentally painful, but it was a lot of fun as well. In today's video, I didn't plan on making the topic that is. We're gonna talk about authentic gypsy jazz rhythm, whatever that means. I didn't plan on making it, but recently the topic of quote unquote authentic gypsy jazz rhythm came up quite a lot on social media and also people asking me questions. So it's as if the universe was trying to tell me something. But before we start, as you guys know, or for those of you who are new to this channel, my life has changed a lot since the pandemic, and my only source of income these days is through the online stuff. And these YouTube videos are free, but if you want to support me, please like, subscribe, comment, follow me on Instagram or on Facebook. And if you want to support me financially, you can maybe buy something off of DC Music School. There's a rumor that there's going to be a end of year sale on DC Music School within the next few days. You can buy something off of DC Music School, off of Sound Slice. I have beginner gypsy jazz lessons. Or you can buy some music on Bandcamp. You'll find all the links in the description box. The topic of authenticity. What does that mean? Well, I think it's a little bit of a controversial topic. And if you guys watched last week's video with Jonathan Stab, we actually talked about this. And I was very happy to hear that Jonathan has the same opinion as me about authenticity. That is, I think it's very important to respect the music that you want to play, but it can be, depending on how one defines authenticity, it can be kind of a futile effort to chase after authenticity because that's something that doesn't necessarily exist or cannot be recreated. Again, depending on how you define it, I'm not going to get into semantics here. But it's also something that I've been seeing on social media lately. These people arguing about who's playing the authentic gypsy jazz. What's very amusing for me is that these are people who have never had any contact with gypsies before. So it's kind of weird in that sense. And then people have been asking me about rhythm. They'd show me videos on YouTube. Hey, this person is teaching this way. Is this the authentic way and all that? Well, it's a very complicated topic, but I'll just say this. The simple answer is it's authentic if the people you're playing with feel that you're doing it the right way. So you can be playing rhythm like this. Yeah. Oh, that swings. Whoa. So you can play like this, and if the band that you're playing with loves that way of playing, and the audience that you're playing for loves what you're doing, who's to say that you should change styles? No one. Just keep playing that way if you want. But those of you who know me, I'm not going to name drop, but I've worked with the who's who of this style of music. All of them. Practically all of them. All the legends. And so I know what these people are looking for. And if you play it that way, you'll never get hired by them. Ever. So that's something you have to think about. Who you're playing with, who you want to play with, and all that stuff. And then there's another thing. Sometimes people have commented to me, it's like, oh, Dennis, your way of playing rhythm is like this and that. But that's not true. Because my way of playing rhythm changes from situation to situation. And there are so many variables. who I'm playing with, who the bass player is, how that bass player is playing, the song, the repertoire, the kind of sound that we're going for. And even at jam sessions, okay, at jam sessions, it's true that I sometimes mess around sometimes more than I should, admittedly. But generally, it's true that I do have certain go-to things. But really, if you investigate really deeply what I do, I change styles, sounds, chord voicings according to the situation. On this YouTube channel, I've also talked a lot about rhythm, different aspects of rhythm playing. I urge you to watch them. I think I made one this past summer on like professional gypsy jazz rhythm. That would have been, I think, June of 2022. And I think I did one on like the history of gypsy jazz rhythm from, I think, 2019 or 2020. You can search through my channel to find those videos. Today, we're specifically going to talk about sound. And this video was especially inspired by two things. I've been with my assistant, Zach Martel, whom you just saw play an amazing solo, a very original solo. And yeah, we were together for the past 2 weeks doing a lot of work, recording for DC Music School, driving all over the Northeast USA and listening to a lot of music, talking a lot about music. So we talked a lot about accompaniment, about rhythm guitar. And my friend from Japan, Yumi, who was asking about all these different styles of rhythms, that she's a violinist, a really amazing violinist. You should check her out. She's not a full-time musician. She's a nurse. And the first time I met her some years ago, just before the pandemic, she had just started learning jazz. And after the pandemic, she improved so much. All this while having a full-time job as a nurse. And it's just very inspiring to see how much she cares about the music. So check out her Instagram or something. I'll put a link somewhere. But anyway, yeah, she was asking me about this, and I was talking to Zach about this. So this is why I'm making this video. Zach and I, for fun, we've been watching YouTube videos of other people teaching gypsy jazz rhythm, authentic gypsy jazz rhythm. And I think this is very important to say. In some videos, I've seen people teach gypsy jazz rhythm and say, oh, this is the way this famous musician taught it to me. No, it's not true. They may have taught it to you, but I think you greatly misunderstood what they taught you, or you got it completely wrong, because I know those players and they don't play rhythm the way you teach it. But again, if that's how you want to play rhythm and your audience is happy with it, fair enough. Again, in this video, I'm talking from the perspective of the top players, what they expect to hear. There's also an issue I want to address. There's kind of this saying in gypsy jazz that you should learn to play rhythm before you learn to play solo. Now, it depends what you mean by that. Of course, all the great soloists do have a decent sound, but if I were to be very honest with you, and this is me having worked with all of these players, I would not want them to play rhythm for me because they're too much of a soloist. And it's normal. They're soloists. They're not meant to play rhythm. Like really, really good rhythm players are those who work to support the soloist, that's what their primary focus is. And in my experience, there are a lot of bad rhythm players. There are a lot of mediocre rhythm players, a lot of average rhythm players, let's say decent, they do the job. There are good rhythm players, and then there are very few really excellent rhythm players. And I want to talk about what excellent really means, because I think upstairs Zach is working on some DC Music School stuff. I think Zach is an excellent rhythm player. And why is that? In all my years of playing this style of music and helping others, coaching others, or giving advice, quite honestly, I've only met two people that I've worked with who I feel are excellent rhythm players. And Zach is one of them, my other buddy now living in Texas, Will Dickerson, is another. What is it about them that makes them so special? Because I've met people who say, "Oh, I just play rhythm. That's my specialty." And okay, that's great. But sometimes these people are kind of overconfident, and they say, "Okay, just because you play rhythm doesn't necessarily mean that you're excellent." And we're going to be talking a lot about subtleties, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but these are my observations. When you're overconfident, you may not be receptive to different ideas. I think it's very important to be confident, but your confidence has to match your ability level. And what I find very inspiring about Zach or Will is that they have a certain level of confidence, and I worked a lot on rhythm with them, but they are always receptive to the needs, to the wants of other rhythm players, soloists. And me, having had the opportunity to work with so many artists, the main lesson that I take away from all this is to, well, yes, to be confident, but to be very, very receptive to the needs of the soloists. Even to this day, I feel like rhythm playing is my strongest area of expertise. But whenever I work with a soloist, especially a soloist that I respect so much, I will do what they ask me to do. If they say, "Hey, Dennis, you're doing too much of this, please change," I will do my best to adapt. And that, to me, is the quality of an excellent rhythm player. And having had the opportunity to work with like a wide range of top level players, that has taught me so much about all the different ways of accompanying, so that really there's no one authentic sound out there. It just depends on who you play with. And hopefully you get to play with people that you highly respect, and then you will be receptive to how they want to play. Now, if you play with someone that you don't respect, then you can choose to quit that band. And I have actually seen such situations where like companies like, I stopped playing with this soloist because I feel like it's definitely not what I want to do. I definitely don't agree with their vision of how I should be playing. And there we go. And my thoughts that I'll be sharing with you today in this video are based on my experiences playing with the top tier players. And on that matter of authenticity, there were some people who were a little bit upset with me some 10 years ago because they were going on about like, "Oh, this is the authentic way of playing gypsy jazz rhythm." And I would say, well, no. They would say this is, sorry, I have to rephrase that. They would say this is the authentic way of playing gypsy jazz rhythm the way this famous player played. And it would be so not it, because they would be listening to recordings that are heavily processed. So when it gets recorded and you listen to it from a speaker or something, it sounds one way, but the way that the player was actually playing is different than what what you think you hear. And so then you try to reproduce what you think you hear, and it ends up being something quite different. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily bad, but it created a whole new way of playing rhythm. And these people were saying that it's based on this way when it's definitely not. And I know so because I know this person personally. I've worked with this person personally. I know exactly how they play it. It's not this way. So a whole new way of playing rhythm grew out of this way. And so many people learned to play this way that I guess it's a new, authentic way of playing gypsy jazz rhythm. So again, it's not necessarily bad. I think there's some cool things out of this new way that maybe even sometimes I would use for certain situations. But that's what I mean by authenticity. It's like a slippery slope. If you say this is how this player played, but it's not, then that's where I'll say no, just definitely not. So be aware of this. So, and especially outside of the gypsy communities, it's often this way and this way. I come more from the gypsy community, from Django Reinhardt and all that. But whatever. And keep in mind that even within the gypsy community, there are so many different ways. And with a lot of my former students, they often just play this game where they play me a recording, and I actually have to guess the ethnicity of the musician, whether they were gypsy or not. And I've never failed so far. I can always hear, because there are certain mannerisms, there are certain accents, certain time feels, that gypsy players do that a lot of non-gypsies do not do. And yeah, it gets really, really nerdy. But just keep in mind that just because it's not quote unquote the gypsy way of doing things doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, in my opinion, if I can say this, that the gypsy way doesn't mean that it's better. It's just a sound, it's an accent. You have different accents within the English speaking world, right? Some people, like, and even in one country, in the USA, there are different accents. In Canada, there are different accents. Some of us say about, some of us say about. It's about time, eh? And so it's just that. It's just a color. So if you're going for a particular color, then yes, that's where maybe you'll have to be careful. But if you're just trying to sound good, then the accent doesn't matter, because I think all accents are valid. And so I've had a lot of people come to me and say, "Oh, I took a lesson with so and so, and they taught me to play rhythm this way, and that all other ways are wrong." And then I went to take a lesson with this other player, and they said what I learned from that other player was wrong, and that the right way was this other way. It gets really, really confusing, doesn't it? Well, like I said, it depends on what your soloist wants. So if you really respect the musician that you're learning from and you want to accompany them, then yes, they're right. Their way is the right way. The other way is the wrong way. You see what I mean? And that's the experience I've had working with so many players. Now, some players don't say anything, so I can play however I want, however I feel. But sometimes with certain players, and that's where I really appreciated the most, when they would tell me little things. I remember when I was with Stokolo Rosenberg and I was accompanying him on a waltz, he asked me to play specific voicings, and I really appreciated that. It's like, okay, these are the voicings that he wants. Some people would tell me to change the sound, to change the dynamics, change the time feel, the groove. So a lot of this depends on the ensemble that you're playing with. Now let me share with you a few thoughts about sound. In one particular video, I saw someone teach rhythm this way. And this video has, I think, a couple of 100,000 views. And it's being taught this way. Like I said, if you want to play rhythm that way, be my guest. And if your audience loves it, sure, learn it that way. But I'm telling you, the top tier players will never, ever, ever hire you. I can't think of any good player that plays rhythm that way. None. I think, in general, what good soloists are looking for in terms of sound is something where they can feel a little bit free. That generally means that the rhythm shouldn't be too loud. Above, like, whether you should use upstruck, whether you should play, like, voice the chords, this or that. The dynamics are very, very important. And there are so many, even professional players, who have no sense of dynamics when they accompany. That's why I say they're better off as soloists than rhythm players. I think you have to be very perceptive. You have to listen to how the soloist is playing. If they're a light player, then you adjust your rhythm, the sound, in such a way that they can be heard. So if someone has a very light touch, like, then I'll play rhythm accordingly. And if someone is a little bit louder, then I could go a little bit louder, but not necessarily that much. I feel, in general, most soloists don't want to be overpowered by the rhythm player. and so I always adjust my levels according to that intensity. Um, and you have to keep in mind that when you play these kinds of guitars, you may think that you don't hear yourself well until you're going to try to overcompensate by attacking much harder. But keep in mind, from the perspective of the person in front of you, they hear you louder than you hear yourself. So you have to be aware of this effect. So I try to play in such a way that I can hear myself, but I also have that in mind so that I tone things down a little bit when I play rhythm. And I think a light rhythm in general is the way to go. So I don't know how this is translating to this microphone, but if you were here in person and if there was another soloist, you would hear this contrast. And it depends. There are certain instruments that are louder than others, much louder. So the super loud instruments like a trumpet or a saxophone can maybe use a little bit more punch. Okay, so that's a very, very, very important thing that I think is lacking in so many players, including professional musicians. They're just not aware of this. And these subtleties, I became so aware of this from working with a dear friend of mine, Vaval Adler, who he doesn't even know, but he was a lot like a mentor to me when I was starting out. And I really, really appreciate it. He taught me the importance of nuance. Now, okay, some of you might bring up the issue that if you go to like these big gypsy festivals where like 10 guitar players and they're all playing like bang out super loud, keep in mind that there is just like a jam session for social reasons, and often they're also pretty drunk. I'm talking about trying to be musical in a real musical situation, working with top level players. This is what they want. Even though these top level players, they get drunk, they get carried away. That has happened to me. So don't refer to such like extreme situations. But look, they're playing super loud there and no one's saying anything, right? The next thing that I would say is that when I play rhythm in such a way that the chords are audible. That can be the voicings that you choose to use. I play voicings where you can clearly hear the harmonies, what they are, the quality of the harmonies, and it can be also the way that you strike the strings, or a combination of the two. Because there are some, as far as voicings are concerned, there are some people who play these super muddy voicings where it's really hard to determine, especially the lower you go. Let's say, let's play a G chord, a G major chord. Well, I would often go for something like this, where the third is here. You can really hear it's major. Or maybe like this, the Django chord, But there are some people who play G major like this. The third is so low and so muddy that it's really hard. It could also be a C chord. At least here in the C chord, the third is a little bit higher. That it's not necessarily so bad. But yeah, look, listen. G, C, G. Right? Ooh, out of tune. So I try to use voicings where the important notes are positioned in such a way that you can determine what the chord quality is. And then as far as the right hand is concerned, not just the right hand, sorry, it's even the left hand, like the way, the duration, because some people, they make it super incredibly short, and then the right hand also kind of muted so that right? So the left hand, the how you put pressure and how you release is important as well. So that's something to think about. And I think these two things are very important. Dynamics and the ability to play in such a way that the soloist can clearly hear what you're playing. And the combination of the two is where you have this balancing act. Because sometimes certain soloists like to play substitutions. And substitutions by nature well, not by nature, but depends on the substitution. But especially when you go outside, it can, how do you say, sound dissonant with the rhythm guitar. Let's say if I play like an A minor and someone is playing like a C minor as a substitution, which is something that is done, and then you can have like, you know, this E natural with this. And so that's why when you play rhythm, you want to play softer than the soloist, and hopefully the soloist will play a little bit more punch. So the person that plays with more punch will overpower the person that is playing softer, so that you don't hear the dissonance. That's how a lot of players get away with these outside substitutions. But you have to play softly, but still loud enough that the soloist can hear you. So these are things to be very aware of. There are some players who strongly discourage the use of the upstroke, and often the reason is because a lot of players don't know how to use the upstroke. In my opinion, the upstroke should be subtle. And some have it a little bit more pronounced than others. It's true. Because some people, they do it in such a way that it just gets in the way. That doesn't sound good to my ears. But something like this maybe sounds decent. And this is achieved by lightening up your wrist, having it very loose, so that when you do the up, there's no force involved. I can make it more pronounced as well. I make it more pronounced by hitting more strings. Okay, so there's that. Then there are some people who say that the bass strings should growl. Generally, yes, that's kind of the thing, but then they exaggerate it, so they end up with... Again, a lot of the rhythm playing should be subtle. Powerful, but subtle. Okay, what else? This is less about sound, but more about being a good accompanist, which I've talked in other videos. But you play in a way that supports the soloist. And sometimes that's choosing when to do certain things and when not to do certain things, like this kind of thing. I heard in Japanese this is called jajang. Jajang. And you have to be very careful with the use of these jajangs. Let's say you're playing a modal song that's like B minor for like 8 bars. Sometimes if the soloist is trying to be very, very free, they stop kind of like keeping track of where the beat is. And so they're going to rely a lot on the rhythm player to know where the form is. And that's where it can be good to do things like... That's like a 4-bar measure. Or like I play this way. To show like, oh, it's a new section. And so that has to be used with a lot of care, with a lot of intention, to show that, oh, we're going to another section. This is the top of the form. We're going to the B section. This is the end of the A section, etc. I suggest that you watch my video. I think it's from 2009, where I talk about the history of like this kind of rhythm, where I go through different styles, because I'm not gonna really talk about all these different styles. What I just wanted to talk about here was this myth of authenticity. Really boils down to those things. I mean, we're not talking about groove either, because that's a whole other topic. Groove being time feel and all that stuff. And I think I talk about that in my oh yeah, the video, I think it's from 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's like it didn't get as many views as I thought it would, because I think it's one of the best videos I ever made. I think the title is like how to play with your idols, your favorite musicians. And there are a lot of things I talk about there that are very, very important. That anyone who's very, very serious or have strong ambitions as musicians, they need to watch that video. But yeah, here we're just talking about sound, the volume, the dynamics. That's a huge thing because, man, I've been in situations where, especially like on gypsy bossas, where people play, bossa nova is generally not such an aggressive style of music. As far as I know, I'm not an expert on Brazilian music, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. But like people will play a rhythm like this. Oh, like and like no, no, no. Light, light, confident, and powerful. Light and powerful. It seems contradictory, but it's possible to play that way. Those are the two most important things. And then if there's a third most important thing is to really immerse yourself in the culture and the language, listening to all the best players, the best rhythm players in recordings. There's a reason why in a lot of recordings you don't see the rhythm player doing all these crazy things that for some reason still today some people think it's cool to do. Things like this. No rhythm player does that. No good rhythm player does that. That's the soloist's job. Now, that doesn't mean that the rhythm player plays like a robot. There's room for interaction, but it's all about listening and subtlety. And this is something that you're going to learn through listening to a lot of recordings, listening to the best rhythm players, asking yourself why they do that. Why do they not do that? And that's kind of how I learned. Also working with a lot of good soloists that I really respect, that taught me a lot about how to play rhythm. Like I said, this is rhythm guitar playing, swing rhythm guitar playing, gypsy jazz rhythm. This is where I feel the most confident as a musician. Yet, despite this confidence that I have, I'm still very, very receptive to the needs of the people that I accompany, and I'm lucky that I get to work with all my favorite players. I don't know why I never chose to live in Europe, but if I lived in Europe, I could be playing all the time. Because whenever I go there, as I said in previous videos, I get calls like where people message, "Hey, let's get together, let's play a gig together." My favorite players. I get to play with my idols, which is I'm very, very honored and all that. And so these are people that I respect so much that I'm gonna do everything I can to make sure that I'm supporting them the way they want me to support them, and I make it known that they can tell me whatever they want to tell me, so that I can adapt myself to what they want me to do. I think being an excellent accompanist is about not being a one-trick pony. It's about being very willing to adapt, to learn what the soloist is asking you to do. Because I've had experiences with people, okay, they have decent sound, even sometimes decent time feel, but then I tell them, I don't want you to play rhythm that way. It's not what I want. And they tell, yeah, but I played with this person. They said I played good rhythm. Yeah, with that person maybe you play good rhythm, but with me, it's not good. I've shared this story in the past where one time I played with one very, very famous player who has a very specific vision of how rhythm should be played, and I think the next day or 2 days later I played with someone else who has the opposite vision, and I had to adapt. I had to change. This is what I mean. So let me end this video by talking a little bit about my buddy Zach up there, because he's really a great rhythm player, in the sense that he's willing to work hard. And with him, we spent months, if not years, fine-tuning these subtle details of accompaniment. I remember just before the pandemic, it came to a point where Zach didn't really need lessons in accompaniment, but he needed experience working with players. And arranged for him to be the rhythm guitar player for a lot of well-known players, and I would play bass. And I would discuss with them, like, when you play with this rhythm player, with this soloist, be aware that they have this kind of way of playing, that you have to do things in this way. Then a month later, we worked with someone else with a completely different way. And before before we worked with those artists, I was telling him, like, okay, be ready for that. At that time, okay, he heard me say what I had to say, but didn't really understand. But until he experienced working with both players, like, wow, now I totally know what you mean when you say, like, it's this different. So being able to experience this firsthand is very, very important. And the reason why I I say I've only met two people who I felt were really, really uh, special when it comes to learning how to play rhythm, because these guys were so receptive to me being hyper critical, which I know is not easy for a lot of people who are learning to play music to go through. It's kind of like the movie Whiplash, except for hopefully I'm not too much of a jerk. But I remember working with Will Dickerson and Zach Martel. I'll be like, nope, 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 no, no, you're slowing down, you're speeding up, you're slowing down, you're speeding up. Now, when it comes to rhythm, no one is ever perfect in terms of like metronomic feel, but actually rhythm was still is one of my biggest weaknesses, but I've worked on it so very, very much that I've become hyper sensitive to the tiniest of fluctuations. And I remember when I first started working with Zach and I told him these things, he couldn't hear these fluctuations. But then later, as we worked a lot together, he started playing with quote unquote bad musicians, and he said, oh my goodness, I could hear how bad these players really were, their fluctuations. These are things that a lot of people don't know how to hear, and that's, I think, this one of the secrets of being a good musician, is to have this innate sense of rhythm. Some people have it, they're born with it, good for them, but some people will have to work really hard, and that was the case for me. It's still something that I work on today, and it's when I give critiques to Zach or whatever, that's often say, hey, this timing can be more like this, can be more like that. It's that important. But yeah, like the whole rhythm thing, the reason why I'm often reluctant to share the full extent of my knowledge is most people are not willing to be critiqued in that way. But if you follow my advice, and if you're really willing to receptive to hearing what I have to say, I guarantee you that of course with a lot of hard work, you will the people that you admire the most in this style of music will be very happy to work with you. And also, especially so if you're a good person, if you're fun to hang around with. You should watch that video from 2 weeks ago, how to work with your idols. So there we go. Maybe some of you are watching this are feeling triggered, and you don't agree with me. That's totally fine. I suggest that you keep doing your thing. And again, if like my main rule is, if you find an audience for the way that you play, there is nothing to change. Keep it that way. But keep in mind that my opinions are coming from my experiences of having worked with the who's who of the style. There we go.